All right. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our February 2019 SharePoint user group session. Thanks for attending today. We do have a special guest host today for our user group, Craig Jenke. And Craig, I'm going to go ahead and turn that over to you. As always, feel free to shoot questions to us in the question pane. And again, thanks for attending. So Craig, I'll turn it over to you.
Hello, this is, excuse me, Craig Jenke. I am guest hosting for Mark Vogt today. Mark had a kind of a personal family thing come up and was unable to make the meeting, so he asked if I could, by chance, be able to do this. So I was just supposed to have a little guest appearance to plug something else. So thank you all for joining, and that's where I'm going with that. I used to run user groups out in Elgin. I ran one in Chicago and kind of passed that off because it was just hard to schedule. So not my first rodeo, but it's been a while since I've done the Chicago land user group. But welcome to everybody for coming. So the agenda for today is SharePoint. We're going to talk about a new kind of talk show. Mark kind of pitched that last week if you were here. Talk about a new user group that I started up. Hasn't gotten very far, but it's gotten a couple meetings in. We're going to talk about SharePoint news and events, Office 365 news and events a little bit. We got an update on a conversation that we started to have about SPFX news and events, and then have an open discussion on single page apps for SharePoint, or that was what we were going to talk about. So we're going to have a little bit of discussion about that, but the person who is going to talk about that, which was Mark and Ralph Rivas from Magenic, are not here today. So we're just trying to gather questions for the next session coming up. And then we will have a BYOP. So I think that stands for bring your own problems. So if you have any questions or concerns that come up in there. And when we get to the SharePoint Office 365 news and events, I think we have MVP Michael Blumenthal. I know he's on there, but is that where you're going to jump in, Michael?
Yes, I'm going to cover the Office 365 news and event.
Cool. So with that being said, we'll kind of get started. So Mark's been pushing our new talk show, Office365.com. We're kind of starting this up. Got a little slow start because Mark has been traveling quite a bit for work for MTech. So we've kind of put this on hold, but we do have a website. It's still being built out. It's going to be Office365.com. And then we're going to try to do like a weekly, Mark calls it a talk show, but a weekly call where we basically just talk about what's coming up in SharePoint, almost like a mini user group. But if anybody has questions that, things that are bothering them, things that they think of, kind of a spur of the moment talk, there's not really going to be anything specific that we have an outlined agenda, just maybe a topic for the day and go with that. And then on that site, when we get it built out, we're also going to try to get a calendar going for all the Office, the SharePoint user group stuff in the land of Chicago, so that we can kind of start coordinating, because like Michael has his user group and Mark has his user group and I have a user group. There's a guy named Dan Ray that's got a Windows user group out in DeKalb. I can't remember what's who's got the one in Harper College, Michael?
That would be Ed Gallagher. He's got that technical operations user group. There's Doug Heminger, who has an Office 365 user group as well. So yes, bringing us all together would be a good thing.
Yeah, so we're trying to get all those updates there and pass out notes and things about events and things that are coming up. So stay tuned for that. Speaking of new user groups, Chicago Power Apps and Flow user group is also a group that I started up about 2 months ago. The Power Apps and Flow are starting to really take off. So I'm, and there wasn't a user group in Chicago, and it's something that I am kind of interested in. It's kind of called the Power Platform. Microsoft is calling it that, wouldn't they? So it's basically 3 products. I am not focusing on Power BI, but there will probably be some talk about it. But Microsoft's Power Platform is really considered Power BI, Power Apps, and Flow. Power BI would be the data visualization for anybody who doesn't know that. Power Apps is kind of the quick, easy, so to speak, way to develop an app that can surface the data in the flow is kind of the behind the scenes workflow and logic behind how the Power Apps would actually use, and then ideally you use all three together so you can create an app that takes data from someplace, manipulates it in some way, shape, or form, and then displays it in a nice, easy to use dashboard. They're pushing that pretty hard for a while there. I didn't think that it was a couple of years. They've been doing it for like a year or so, a couple of years actually, or more. But a lot of it has just been kind of minor and not really ready for prime time. But in the last 6 months or so, I think it's really taken off. There wasn't a presence here, so I was just diving into that opportunity. So that should be the first Thursday of the month. We've been having it downtown. And with a call-in options, because obviously not everybody can make it downtown. Which brings me to the next topic, is a Power Platform World Tour, is a conference that basically the Dynamics user groups, people who are in charge of that, are running. And it's a 2-day conference. They will be in Chicago. I did not put the date on it. It is April 9th and 10th. So it'll be downtown Chicago. And there's a $100 discount on it. They just picked kind of the speakers, so there will be a lot of Power Apps, a lot of Flow. Let's see if I can pull that up. There we go. So yeah, so it'll have a lot of Power Apps, Flow, and that kind of stuff. So you can see kind of the agenda here. They've got some showcase solutions, Power Apps, so it's all out there. It is going to be at the Embassy Suites. And there will be, on the Monday before, there will be an advanced session on workflows, and then there will also be one on Power BI that is separate. So just something to keep in mind on your calendar. And let me see if I can go back. And then the last thing that I have, SharePoint Saturday in the Chicago suburbs will be May 4th. It's at the DeVry and Addison. The sessions usually start about 9 and we get over about 3. And I'm one of the co-organizers about that. We've got a fair number of speakers already scheduled. So Michael Blumenthal, I believe, is one of them, and Mark Vogt will be one. So, but usually there's going to be we end up with somewhere around 24 sessions, 6 tracks, 4 deep. So a lot of good information, and it's really anything in the Office 365 world. That brings us to SharePoint news and events. We have updates have been posted out there. We'll share out this deck afterwards, but there's a link there. I have not learned a whole lot. I know 2019 has basically been released, but I have not really looked at the on-premises stuff. I have been in Office 365 mode for the last year or so. Migrating to Office 365 is really what I've been doing a lot of. So then we have the SharePoint and Microsoft roadmap. So that's just basically, if you go, there's a link here, but if you go to roadmap.microsoft.com, it takes you there. So you can get all the latest news and releases that's coming up for SharePoint and Office 365. One of the big news is Skype for Business is now officially replaced with Microsoft Teams. That would be the Office 365 version. I don't think that the on-premises version has been replaced or is going to be replaced. Yeah. So,
and I want to clarify that a bit as well, which is that for new tenants, new Office 365 tenants under a certain size, they do not get Skype for Business provisions. They only get Teams provisioned, and so that in that sense, it's been a full replacement. Obviously, organizations with larger organizations and organizations which have Skype for Business today, the path to Teams is the official path. But the journey on that path can be very different for different companies. And if some companies, it's going to take a year or more to make that transition, especially if you have the voice capabilities of Skype for enterprise voice and calls. You expect that it's going to be a more complicated journey.
Thank you for that clarification. So events that are coming up in the SharePoint Office 365 world, Collaboration Summit is, I believe it's a 2-day event down in Branson, Missouri in March, put on by Mark Rackley and I think the Pate Group, which is a consulting group of a couple of SharePoint MVPs. It's a low-cost version of, and a short version of, or either a long version of a SharePoint Saturday or a short version of like SharePoint Fest. I believe it's $99 still for the entire conference, and it's in Branson, which is always a fun place to go. So if you're looking for something to do in March, that would be a good one. SharePoint Saturday Omaha should be the last Saturday in March, if I am not mistaken, and I actually will be there presenting on a session for information security and the Security and Compliance Center. So I'll be doing that, an intro to security compliance. Then in April, if you're in the Washington, D.C. area, SharePoint Fest is there. SharePoint Summit is in Virginia. I don't know much about that one, but I'm guessing similar event, like a SharePoint Saturday or something like that. And then, as I mentioned, May, we have SharePoint Saturday, May 4th in the Chicago suburbs. Directions is out in Las Vegas, and then SharePoint North America is also out in Las Vegas. So I think that the Directions precedes SharePoint by a couple days. So I think you can get that all together. And Directions, I believe, is more of a developer type of thing. So all good stuff coming up. A lot of events out there if anybody can make it. And we encourage you to go. And it's my word of advice, if you're there just for the content, that's really great. There's a lot of great content out there, but just meeting up with people, trying to network has been really the thing that I've found the most value out of. There's some great people out there who are just looking to share their problems and their solutions with. So always a good time. Let's see. The next slide, we have Office 365 news and events. That's Michael, so I'll see if I can change it to him. And there we go.
Thank you very much, Greg. Let me share my screen. Okay. Confirming everyone can see my screen and hear me?
Yep, you're good. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm going to talk about Office 365 news and events. We'll start off with the news, and there's a number of changes they announced that are going to be user impacting, and so you should be aware of and plan for and plan on how you want to communicate to users, or if you need to do testing or any kind of remediation plan. So the first one is that modern lists and libraries will be turned on at the tenant level, and you won't be able to opt out of lists and libraries, the modern UX at the tenant level anymore after April 1st. So you can still opt out of modern UX and go to classic UX for lists and libraries at the site and list level. But as of April 1, if you haven't flipped the modern switch at the tenant level, they will flip it for you. This does not affect pages, but it does affect lists and libraries. And even within a list and lists and libraries, if you're using a view that modern doesn't support yet, that view will fall back to the classic appearance. And they're saying they'll continue to support classic UX, so they haven't given an end time when they're turning off classic UX altogether, for example, for classic pages, but you can assume it's not forever. They said they released modern list and library user experience 3 years ago, so you can kind of assume that there's going to be a 3-year lifetime on other aspects of the classic user experience as well. So let's take a quick look at what that means. This is a document library that is in classic mode. You see the tabs across the top here. Let me get out my laser pointer. And you see the tabs across the top here. And you see this toolbar over here. And this is how the library looks. If we go to modern UX, we see the tabs have gone away, and we see a different look and feel to the command bar and the documents themselves. And another key difference is if you were going to view this page on a mobile browser, it would work and look nice, versus if you viewed this page on a mobile browser, it would just be super tiny and hard to deal with, and you'd have to pan around to see stuff. So modern UX, as most of you probably know already, is mobile friendly. And so this is the user experience that everybody's going to have as of April 1st. At least the 10th level control will no longer be available. If you need to revert them at the individual user level, there is this link to here, return to classic SharePoint, and you can, the user can then also click exit classic experience if they need to, if the site itself is modern. You can at the list level change, list and library level change which experience, whether it's the 10 level setting that takes control, or you can specify modern or classic at that site level. Once they flip this switch on the 10 level setting, then effectively it's only going to be whether you're modern or UX at the site and list level. So that's something to keep in mind. If the difference between this and that is going to freak users out, then you need to prepare a communication plan. Or if you have other dependencies on Classic, where you've got Classic pages and Classic sites, and then the lists and libraries in the Classic sites are going to start looking modern, but the pages aren't, then you may need to do some user communication or remediation around that as well. Moving on to another piece that was announced is that the feedback button on the bottom of SharePoint's pages is going to go away. This feedback button was a way for end users to provide feedback to Microsoft about SharePoint and contribute to user voice with suggestions or complaints. What I've heard is that caused a lot of end user confusion because people were thinking they would be providing feedback to their IT department. And they weren't. So this feedback button is going to go away, and then they're going to add some new feedback options in the navigation or help pane in the future. And so this will start disappearing off February 18th. So that's probably not something that needs a lot of communication about, but maybe let support staff know. There's a number of news improvements that were announced recently. There's a blog post that went out on Tech Community on Monday that lays these things out. And here's a screenshot, and what you see is you can now customize the title region with the settings you see there. You can have different backgrounds for different sections of the page. You can have custom page thumbnails, and you have custom page descriptions. So that's, I'll let you look at that for just a moment longer. So those are the improvements to SharePoint News. Then let's go on to upcoming events. Now, some of these Craig's covered. He's told you about Power Platform World Tour. Craig, do you have a user group meeting scheduled besides the Power Platform World Tour? Craig, you might still be on mute. Okay, well, we'll come back to that. The Office 365 Adoption Use Group, our next meeting is April 4th. Some background noise.
Michael, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay. So the next Office 365 Adoption User Group meeting is April 4th. That'll be downtown at Microsoft's office in the Loop. And we have Cher Delfino presenting on Flow administration. Cher is a Microsoft Premier Field Engineer. So if you're interested in learning more about tenant-level Flow administration, please go to our user group website and join us. You can find us on Meetup. We just had last week a presentation on Bing for Business, or actually now it's called Microsoft Search in Bing, which is a unified Bing search experience that shows both organizational search results and then a separate section, but on the same page, internet search results. And so if you're interested in learning more about that, The slides are available on SlideShare on my SlideShare page, slideshare.net/Michael Blumenthal, and the video from that will go up by the end of this week and be available next week on our YouTube channel.
Hey, Michael, would you be able to potentially maybe add the link to that on the user group, the LinkedIn user group? That would be great.
Yep. Yes, I can put those up there.
Okay.
I see there was one question about Modern View working for document sets and calendar. I am not sure of the specific support for those. I know for calendaring, they are providing, there is a modern web part for calendaring, but I think that's based on the calendar, the Outlook calendar for a group, not on a classic SharePoint calendar. So I think that the classic SharePoint calendar is going to be one of the last ones to get a modern user experience. But it's worth testing, and I'd love to hear back from you next month on what you discover. Okay, and document sets I'm not sure of as well. As Craig said, the Chicago SharePoint Saturday is May the 4th. Craig, you're still looking for sponsors for that, correct?
Yeah, we're always still looking for sponsors for that.
Okay.
Speakers is closed, so.
Speakers is now closed. Okay.
Yeah, sorry about the noise. My headset died, and I had to all of a sudden, or was having reverberating issues, and I had to switch, so I wasn't able to mute it. And
sure. No problem. Do you have another Power Apps and Flow meeting coming up besides the World Tour?
Yeah, there should be one the first. I haven't got it on the schedule, but it should be the first Thursday in March.
Okay.
So that'll be going out soon.
We'll look forward to that. Okay, so
hey, I have a question for you for the lists, or not a question, maybe, but a statement. Because I'm playing with this for a site I'm building, but so I have the list, right? And then I want to surface it on another page for like users to see that list.
Right.
What I think I have found out, and there's a user voice out there for this, is if I go to the modern page and add the list view kind of to the page so that those items show up, there's no way to hide what we call the Chrome in in Classic. So it will show you, like, it'll give you the new button to add. It'll let you change the view. So like I wanted to create a view that was just only things that were assigned to me, or things that I had submitted, kind of like it was a ticketing request system. So I just want to be able to show those, but and I didn't want anybody to be able to click on see all and go to that page, but it doesn't seem to do that. It seems to show those right in the pane of the list of items that you have.
So I would say the best thing to do there is to vote up the user voice for suggestions so that Microsoft prioritizes that for improvement.
I did do that, and there has been several requests for like calendar views, which I know you talked about. So currently I'm using like the events web part to show them like each individual tiles, but there's not really a good way to display the calendar. So this is just kind of things that I'm finding out as I've got like my first site that wanted to go totally modern. But yeah, so.
Yeah, someone suggested a calendar workaround to me. Let me see if I can remember what that was. One of the things I would suggest is put the link to the user voice item in our LinkedIn site. Okay, so now the thing I have about calendars is how to bring a SharePoint calendar into Teams, or actually any kind of calendar into Teams. The way to bring it in Teams would be use one of the calendar web parts to put it on a SharePoint page, and then reference the SharePoint page as a tab in Teams. But that doesn't really address the question you had.
No, so I'm using like the events web part to display the individual tile, and then like they can still get at the full-on old calendar view if they go onto the site contents, but or you create a link to that page, but it's just not. That's still got that classic look and feel, even when you go like behind the scenes. So there's some of that you need to communicate with new users, or if you're people building, building sites, because I know we get a lot of contractors that come in. It's something to keep in mind is that the back end of SharePoint isn't always, until they get everything updated, isn't going to be look and feel as pretty as the front end.
Yep. Very true.
But by and large, I think it's a little bit, I like it as far as creating new clean pages.
Well, why don't I stop sharing my screen, and Craig, you can take it back and keep going with the slides. Thank you very much, everyone.
Let me know when you can see the screen and what you see.
Go ahead.
Okay, so now we're back to SPFSX news and events, and that was going to be done by Ralph Rivas out of Magenic, but he had got tied up with work, so he is not going to be here. And this is not my area of expertise, so hopefully nobody was looking for that information on this one, which goes to our next slide. We also had an open discussion on single-page apps in SharePoint. What do we want members to explore? This is where we were going to get into that. Frameworks, Angular 7, React, Vue, others, best practices. So I guess I will throw this out. You can either answer in the question, Vue, or if you want to be unmuted, we can have a discussion about what should be going forward, because I know this is what Mark was hoping to drive forward in the next 2 to 3 sessions about, just doing like single page applications, that kind of stuff. So what was the group interested, so he could plan accordingly? Sir, any thoughts, questions on that?
So I can go ahead and start unmuting people so that we can have some open discussion. So give me 1 second. And if you choose not to speak, you can go ahead and mute yourself. Werner, you're unmuted. Songmei, you're unmuted. Paul, Patrick,
I can
Peggy.
start off by asking questions.
I just muted Songmei. She's in the middle of something. Give me 1 second.
I can start this off by asking a question or two. So are single-page apps developed with the SharePoint framework, or is it a different development approach altogether?
I think it's with the framework, but I have not made any single-page apps. So if we've got anybody out in the field who wants it.
Hey, Bob. Bobby, you're also unmuted as well. I know that you had a question. Anthony, you're unmuted. I'm just going down the line here, guys. And
okay, I have a question that I typed in there.
thanks, Bobby. So Bobby typed a question for a workflow scenario where multiple user groups are involved and data for different fields are continually added through different steps. Is there a way to show specific fields only in different steps based on the user who's accessing it at the time?
So out of the box, if you're talking about a SharePoint list and wanting different people to see different things on a view form of a SharePoint list, there's the SharePoint lists themselves. The views themselves don't have that capability built in. You can either build something custom, or you can use Power Apps to make a custom list form. And in Power Apps, you do have the ability to do field level logic to decide what displays. And then there's other workflow scenarios and workflow solutions like Nintex and K2, which would have a different approach to solve that.
Good answer, Michael. I agree with you.
Thank you. Next question, please.
Do we just jump in?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so
we can just jump down to a general discussion, because if you have any questions, that was the next one. Bring your own problems is what we had listed, so we can just move to that too.
That's my category. So this is Paul. This is a bit of a newbie question for everybody, but just so because SharePoint's so flexible about allowing people to share documents, if there are people that are, let's say you've got a team of 10 that are working out of a team SharePoint site, and then they share that document with someone who's not one of those 10. Now all of a sudden someone can access that document, and it just seems like permissions can get completely out of control. And I was just wondering how other people have just managed permission sprawl where users are added to site permissions as opposed to being able to effectively manage it via groups.
Great question. I'd say this is a common issue that a lot of people are dealing with. And one of the ways that you can regain control of permissions is using third-party tools. I mean, out of the box, there's very little that you can do to control sharing like that, because all the user experiences make sharing individual items in different ways very easy. So I would look at, if this is a significant concern for your organization, I would possibly, one approach is to look at a vendor like AvePoint and their cloud governance product, and Craig, you can probably talk to that more than I can, about how they let you put policies in place that can retake control of permissions. And another one is using a tool like ShareGate to routinely run reports, but I think that's more of a manual effort. I think from a policy and procedure thing, one of the things that you would want to put in place is on a periodic basis, whether that's once a month or once a quarter or something, have a site owner review all the access permissions in their site and either clean them up or certify that they're correct. Right. So it's a lot of policy and governance approach to that mess.
Yeah. It's great that it's so easy to share. But
yeah, just to go on with what Michael said, some of that comes to setting levels at the tenant, and you can at least eliminate some of that. Do we want them to share with people external to the organization and those kind of things? And obviously limiting as much sharing externally as we can, and then creating either sites or things like that, external sites for them to share that data where we can kind of control better who's in that team and that kind of thing. And then, as he said, there's AvePoint has like a tool that you can set your policies for that will allow you to break inheritance, so to speak, because it can't really stop you from doing that, but then it immediately, so when you go to do it, it immediately resets it back to the original thing, so that you technically can't, but it kind of looks like it. But so there's those things, the running the reports, the checking, and then there is we like to think that our users will do the right thing if we educate them on it. So it's teaching them how to share appropriately. I believe one of the when you go to share, one of the settings or one of the options is to share with people who already have permissions. So maybe you just want to share with somebody else on your team specifically, or time box it so that the link expires within 5 days or whatever. So it's a little bit of user coaching too.
Right. Because we changed some of the settings where you can uncheck allow members to share the site in individual files and folders, but we found that the share button, if you're looking at a document library, it still works.
Yeah, no, I found that out too. That was a big concern. We were actually, it was a panel discussion last couple months ago, SharePoint Expo, which is a little mini conference that Harmon IE organizes, and one of the people who was asking questions was, how do you get around that? And I'm going to be honest with you, I didn't know that that's quite how that worked with that at the time. So it's not a widely known gap, right? So.
Gotcha. But it is a gap. It's known. Microsoft knows.
Yeah, I believe that there is a user voice out there for that too. So,
gotcha.
But it goes along with Microsoft kind of motto for SharePoint and Teams is, let's be collaborative as possible, and then, then let's figure out how to rein that back in.
Right, right. No, I agree. That's the default. The next thing I wanted to ask people is, so we have some documents that we want to make and we want those documents to go through a workflow approval process, and Flow is definitely an option. And we don't have any workflow tools today that we're using, but I've also been looking at something like K2, or Nintex, which I know just would be, just more Flow on steroids. My concern, I was wondering what other people thought. I just feel like, even though Flow's come a really long way and it gets better and better, like every month or week, it's still not as robust as a K2 or Nintex, which can do even more. But I was wondering what other people were thinking and what they were using.
I have my thoughts on that, but I will let anybody else answer if we got anybody that wants to.
I'm just going to say that I've got the same impression that, K2 and Nintex have had a long head start. They're a lot more mature. They cost a lot more money.
Yeah, so
Yeah, right.
to go with that, I think you need to sit down and kind of plan out what workflows are you want, right? So if they're just simple approval workflows, or a vacation approval, I want it to go to a manager, so maybe a 2-3 step approval. And actually, so if you're using Power Apps or actually Microsoft Forms, you can do some kind of nice little forms on top of that.
Yeah.
Then I would stick with that. Now, I've seen, customers that have really complex workflows where they want, looping, a lot of loops into it, and, tapping out to different systems and that kind of thing. And, then it gets a little bit more complicated and more harder to do in Flow, because there's just some things, as just we kind of said, it's not there yet, right? So
Yeah.
I think you need to list out what you want, and then if it meets your options, like I said, if you just got like 2 or 3, why spend the money on
right.
something like that?
I agree. That's exactly how I was thinking about it too. Another item I want to bring up, if you don't mind, is that I'm wondering if people are having the same issues that we're dealing with related to managing team site access. So a little bit different than the first scenario, but let's say that just once we've created a team and that a team SharePoint site, and that there's an Office 365 group associated with it, there are some times when you don't want to add people to the team, but you need them to access a folder within a document library, and in a like a legacy classic site, it didn't feel like a big deal. You could just kind of create a subfolder, and you didn't feel like you were kind of breaking anything. But it feels like with the way that the permissions are set up in sites and how tightly wound the Office 365 groups are to the permissions of the site, that if you want to go off the ranch and permission, let's say, an individual to a specific folder after breaking inheritance, that you're kind of going really against the grain of what Microsoft intended for team sites. That it really wasn't intended for permissioning people outside of that team or that office group. That has everyone kind of felt that way too? Kind of struggled with that?
So interestingly, that was a topic that I was thinking of introducing, right? Sort of similar to that. So that's been making its rounds on Twitter and in the user voice. And one of the reasons why is because Microsoft so this is what it sounds to me like. A lot of people have been asking for what they call private channels, right? So a channel that I want to only have a couple people in the larger part of my team have access to. A lot of that, might be like the client billing on a project that I only want to be able to share it with the people who really need billing access to it, or one member from the client team who only really needs access to the billing, right? They don't need access to all the project plans and that kind of stuff, or nobody who's building the system actually needs to see that. So that is something that should be coming out pretty soon, from what I've been reading. And then there's been a lot of debate over is that really what Teams is the purpose for, and what are the use cases for that. So I think it's coming. I just don't think it's here yet.
Right. Got it. Okay.
But it's soon to be released.
I'll agree with Craig on this. Private channels within Teams is one way to address that. I have noticed that there is some limited capability within modern SharePoint sites that are team connected to make the SharePoint site more accessible to a wider audience than the team itself. But yeah, I mean, every time you go and configure permissions on a more granular object, you're potentially creating some sort of headache down the road. I mean, I think it's just a matter of what is your organization comfortable with supporting. I mean, SharePoint clearly supports that use case. Does it seem like you're going behind the scenes to do something to get something done? Well, yeah. And so Office is a Swiss Army knife. If you want to pull out that tool to do that, I'd say that there's nothing stopping you from doing that. What you might consider is, instead of doing a folder level, maybe do a library and permission the library. That way, you're not touching the library that Teams is using for channels.
Right. It's a good idea.
Just an option.
And then there's always the foldback if there's just a couple of things and there's, maybe a OneDrive, right? So it depends on your use case scenario.
Right. Gotcha.
Good question, though.
Looks like we have another question coming from Songmai. Power Apps responsive canvas layout works for both landscape and portrait mode available now. Is that correct?
That is my understanding, but I have not played with that. So.
And then next
Hey, Songmai?
question, is there...
Songmai, can you hear us? All right, I put her back on hold. Go ahead.
Her next question was, is there a way to hide all view on Modern List so that people cannot switch views?
And that was just the question I posed to Michael. I have not found that. So that is one of the limitations that I have figured. That I see it's a major limitation, right? And there's a lot of user voice in there trying to change that. So if you have access to the library, you can change the view.
Yeah, I mean, part of that is you'd have to by default, members of a team. If it's a modern site, the permissions that a user gets is edit access, not contribute access. And so you would need to probably create a custom permission level that would not let users edit views, and then make sure everyone who was access, or make sure that no one could, make sure only that permission level was the effective one for that list or library. So all the contributors, members, visitors would only have that permission level in that library. Then I would hope that would mean that they would not see the options for editing, saving as a view, and then you could limit them to just one view by deleting the other views.
I will try that, but I haven't seen that. I was checking with somebody who just had visitor access, and they were able to choose the view that they wanted to see. So then it would come down to, what do they have access to?
You can't do permissions on views, but if you limit it to one view, then it would apply to all users in that library.
Yeah, that's actually the way I could get around my problem, because like I said, mine's a ticketing request system, and I only want to be able to see things that are me or assigned to me, which then becomes a problem because not everybody, they would have to log in as the one admin to be able to see it. So maybe.
So let me turn the question back around, say to you, Craig, and say, if you built a Power App to do your list view, would that give you the capability to limit the view?
And I was trying not to do it that way because I didn't want to I didn't want to make it overly complicated, but I'm probably going to have to now. So that is no. So that's not what my problem was. because I did the form, right, but then kind of having that list in the SharePoint library where my IT team could kind of go in and see that list and see what's new and what needs to be done, right? I wasn't wanting to make it a full-on Power App to have to monitor that, right? So my easiest thing would just be not to surface the list, because that was I was going to do as like a friendly thing for the user. So if a user goes into the page where the form is, they can fill out the form for the request, but then next to the form there was also a list of items that they've submitted, right? So that they would see only what they have submitted. And that was my hope, but now that's not working, so I'm going to probably pull off that page and just point the admins to a different page, right, and not let the regular users see that. Is my easier solution, because again, we have, as in any project, we have time and budget, right? So if I start building Power Apps, that's going to take me, a few more hours and eat into my budget.
Okay, I think that's all the questions that have come in so far.
Well,
one thing I wanted to throw out, if we've got a couple minutes, it's one of the things I've noticed, this is Paul again, is that so we have our site set, our tenants set up to only allow internal sharing. And one of the things that we found is that if we bump up our tenant to the next highest level or just even to the level to allow external access, the SharePoint automatically assumes that all of your sites should also be bumped up to that new minimum level. So, or to that new, least restrictive level. So, and it's interesting. I mean, you could be on the active sites page on SharePoint and see that the sites aren't shared externally, and then you hit refresh after you bump up the tenant level to allow for external access, and now all of a sudden, every single site you have is now allows external access. So, like that, SharePoint doesn't make the assumption that what you had before you wanted, and that
right.
You only want to promote. Has that been an issue? Have other people noticed that too?
It's an inheritance configuration. So yes, your site collections are inheriting the tenant setting.
Yeah, got it.
And so Craig, correct me if I'm wrong here. You could then go and individually set all these sites to have their own settings. But if you've never individually set that on a site, it'll just inherit whatever the tenant is.
That is my understanding too. So my guess is that you would want to, if that was something that you had planned on in advance, right, and you knew about it. So apparently not for you, but for anybody else out there, you might want to be working on a PowerShell script to go through and make that setting after the fact, right, or make it before the fact and then switch it. So.
Got it. Okay, so it's the inheritance that's causing that. Gotcha.
Yeah, it's a big pain. No, yeah, you would think it would be great if you could change it, and then it would ask you, do you only want this to take effect on any new sites or on all your sites? But
right. You understand.
There's a lot of stuff that should be. Do you want this going forward, or do you want this retroactive?
Right.
Then I think we're pretty close to the end of the hour, so I think there's been some pretty good discussions and a lot of great questions by Paul and some from Sangmei. So I think we're going to wrap it up. The next meeting apparently is March 13th, so next month. We'll go over all the regular stuff. I hope Mark will be back and ready to lead that, and we will get some demonstrations about single-page apps. It should be the first in at least a 2 to 3 part series, and Ralph Reeve has again should be presenting that. So Michael, I appreciate all the help answering questions, and from Dina and Edith, I appreciate your doing the admin portion and helping us get set up, and appreciate all the questions and everybody who was attended. Dina, is there a wrap up that you like to do as to what you're going to do with the slides and that kind of stuff?
Sure, thanks. So thanks everybody for attending. We will be posting the recording. It should be up by tomorrow on the normal pages that we have. So everybody will get a link to that by probably tomorrow morning. And Michael's going to post a couple of things onto the LinkedIn user group. So if you are not part of the LinkedIn user group yet, and you just signed up for the one session, feel free to do that. So this way you'll get notifications on upcoming events, as well as, links to some of the upcoming events that was talked about today, as well as links to slides and things of that nature. So thanks for attending, and have a great rest of the week, everybody.
Yep. Thanks, everybody. Enjoy the great weather we're having.
Thank you, everyone.
If you're in Chicago. So, bye.
Thanks, guys. Thank you.